somewhere beneath the surface of the western Pacific Ocean, past the point where sunlight fades to nothing, past the zone where pressure crushes steel like paper, there exists a place so remote and so alien that we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about what lives there. It is called Challenger Deep, and it sits at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, nearly 11 kilometers below the waves. To put that in perspective, if you drop the tallest mountain on Earth into this abyss, its peak would still be submerged under more than a mile of ocean. This is not merely the deepest point on Earth. For many researchers, it is the last great frontier of biological mystery our planet has to offer. And what has been found there, and what remains stubbornly unexplained, may change everything we thought we knew about the boundaries of life itself. The story of Challenger Deep begins in 1875, when a British naval vessel conducting a global oceanographic survey lowered a weighted rope over the side of the ship and watched it descend. It kept descending and descending. When the rope finally went slack, the crew realized they had found something extraordinary, a depth that seemed almost impossible, a wound in the ocean floor so vast and so deep that it defied the imagination of the era. The location was named after that ship, and the name has carried the weight of mystery ever since. For nearly a century after that initial discovery, the trench remained essentially unexplored. The technology simply did not exist to send anything, human or mechanical, to such a depth. The pressure at the bottom of Challenger Deep exceeds 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. A human body, unprotected, would be compressed into something unrecognizable within seconds. The cold is absolute. The darkness is total. And yet, in 1960, two men decided to go there. Jacques Piccard, a Swiss oceanographer, and Don Walsh, a lieutenant in the naval forces of the United States, descended into Challenger Deep aboard a specially constructed vessel designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep. Their journey took nearly 5 hours. When they finally settled onto the bottom, they looked out through a small porthole into what most people assumed would be a lifeless void. What they saw instead stopped them cold. Moving through the sediment below them, illuminated faintly by their lights, were creatures, living creatures. Flat fish-like organisms and small shrimp-like beings moving across the floor of the deepest place on Earth. This was the first clue that something profound was happening down there. Life, it seemed, had found a way into the most inhospitable environment imaginable. But the witnesses to the strangeness of Challenger Deep did not stop with those two pioneers. Over the following decades, as unmanned submersibles began making the journey with better cameras and more sophisticated sampling equipment, the accounts multiplied. Marine biologists who reviewed footage described creatures that seemed almost impossible. Translucent organisms drifting through the water column, gelatinous beings that appeared to have no solid structure whatsoever, and microbial life thriving in conditions that, according to conventional biology, should have made any metabolism impossible. One of the most credible and detailed accounts came from a deep-sea research team that deployed a lander, a weighted instrument platform that sinks to the bottom and records data before floating back to the surface. When the footage was reviewed, researchers found that the lander had attracted visitors almost immediately upon landing. Creatures described as large, pale amphipod crustaceans, some reaching lengths that shocked the scientists involved, swarmed the bait containers within hours. These were not tiny microbes. These were macroscopic animals, living and feeding at a depth that should, by all rights, be a dead zone. The investigation into what exactly lives at Challenger Deep has been ongoing for decades, and the results have been consistently surprising. Researchers have identified hundreds of species in and around the Mariana Trench, many of them entirely new to science. Among the most puzzling are the single-celled organisms known as foraminifera, which have been found at the very bottom of the trench in sizes that dwarf their shallow water relatives. Normally microscopic, some of these organisms found at Challenger Deep reach several centimeters in length, giants by the standards of their kind, and completely unexplained by current biological models. Then there is the matter of the sounds. During several deep recording expeditions, hydrophones, underwater microphones, deployed in and around the Mariana Trench have captured acoustic signatures that researchers have struggled to categorize. Some are clearly biological in origin. The calls of whales traveling thousands of kilometers away can reach the trench, distorted and echoing in strange ways by the unusual acoustic properties of the deep. but other sounds have proven more difficult to explain. Low-frequency pulses, rhythmic and structured, recorded during multiple separate expeditions by different research teams. These sounds do not match the known acoustic signatures of any identified marine creature. They do not match geological activity, and they appear, based on the recordings, to originate from within the trench itself. Researchers have been careful not to leap to dramatic conclusions. The deep ocean is acoustically complex, and sounds can travel enormous distances and be transformed in ways that make identification extremely difficult. But the fact remains that these recordings exist, that they have been reviewed by multiple independent teams, and that no consensus explanation has emerged. The investigation of Challenger Deep connects to a broader pattern of unexplained biological discoveries in the world's deep ocean trenches. Similar trenches in other parts of the Pacific have yielded comparable surprises. Organisms living at extreme depths, species that seem to violate established principles of biology, and acoustic anomalies that resist easy categorization. In the Philippine Trench, researchers discovered a species of snailfish, a soft-bodied, tadpole-like creature, living at depths that were previously considered absolutely incompatible with vertebrate life. The discovery required a fundamental revision of scientific understanding about where complex animals can survive. In the Kermadec Trench, located northeast of New Zealand, sampling expeditions brought up sediment containing not just microbial life, but complex organic compounds that suggested biological activity far more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. The chemistry of life, it appeared, was operating at the very bottom of the ocean in ways that challenged existing models of how ecosystems function. The theories attempting to explain what is happening at Challenger Deep fall into several broad categories, and they are not mutually exclusive. The first and most scientifically mainstream explanation centers on adaptation. Life, the argument goes, is extraordinarily resilient, given enough time. And the Mariana Trench has existed for millions of years. Organisms can adapt to almost any stable environment. The pressure, the cold, the darkness, these are simply parameters that evolution has had sufficient time to work around. The giant foraminifera, the amphipods, the snailfish, all of these, according to this view, are simply the products of deep-time evolution operating in an isolated and extreme environment. Strange, certainly, unprecedented in some cases, but ultimately explicable through conventional biology. The second category of theory involves the question of chemosynthesis, the process by which certain microorganisms derive energy not from sunlight, but from chemical reactions. In the deep ocean, communities of organisms have been found clustered around hydrothermal vents, living in complete independence from the sun-driven food chains that sustain almost all other life on Earth. Some researchers have proposed that similar chemosynthetic processes may be sustaining far more complex ecosystems at Challenger Deep than have yet been documented. Entire food webs operating in the dark, powered by the chemistry of the Earth itself. The third category is more speculative, and it is the one that keeps certain researchers awake at night. The deep ocean trenches, including Challenger Deep, have been largely inaccessible for most of human history. Our total time spent observing the floor of the Mariana Trench, across all expeditions combined, amounts to only a few hours. The ocean covers more than 70% of the Earth's surface, and its deepest regions remain almost entirely unexplored. Some researchers, speaking carefully, on the record, have suggested that the size and complexity of certain biological signatures detected in the deep trenches imply the existence of organisms significantly larger than anything yet documented. The acoustic anomalies, the unusual chemical signatures, the sheer volume of organic material detected in deep sediment samples. Taken together, these data points suggest to some that the inventory of deep ocean life is far from complete. What remains unexplained, even after decades of investigation, is substantial. The mechanism by which organisms survive and apparently thrive at pressures that should denature proteins and destroy cellular structures is not fully understood. The origin of the unidentified acoustic recordings has not been determined. The full extent of the biological community at Challenger Deep has not been mapped. And perhaps most intriguingly, the evolutionary history of the creatures living there, how they got to the bottom of the trench, how long they have been there, and what their relationship is to shallow water relatives, remains a subject of active and sometimes contentious scientific debate. There is also the question of what has not been found. Every expedition to Challenger Deep returns with samples and footage, and every set of samples and footage reveals new species, new behaviors, new mysteries. but the sampling is inevitably incomplete. A lander sitting on the floor of the trench for a few hours, attracting whatever happens to be nearby, cannot tell us what is living in the water column above, or in the sediment below, or in the parts of the trench that remain unvisited. The absence of evidence, in this case, is very far from evidence of absence. And then there is this: in recent years, expeditions to Challenger Deep have detected traces of human-made materials, synthetic fibers, chemical compounds associated with industrial processes. At the very bottom of the trench, life has adapted to the deepest point on Earth. But the deepest point on Earth has not escaped the reach of human activity. What effect this contamination is having on the organisms that live there, on the ecosystems that have developed over millions of years in isolation, is unknown. It is a question that adds urgency to the investigation and a layer of unease to the mystery. The bottom of Challenger Deep sits in darkness, under pressure that defies imagination, in silence broken only by sounds we cannot fully explain. Something lives there. Many things live there. And we have barely begun to understand what those things are, how they survive, or what they might tell us about the true boundaries of life in the universe. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but slowly, expedition by expedition, sample by sample, it is beginning to give them up. If the idea of creatures thriving in the most extreme environment on Earth, and the sounds that have no explanation, left you with more questions than answers, you are not alone. That sense of wonder is exactly where discovery begins. If you want to keep exploring the unexplained, subscribe so you never miss an investigation, and leave a comment below telling us what you think is down there. The next story goes even deeper.